one of the more popular things that people are studying these days is popular art or popular media. One of the things that's being learned, and one of the things that's becoming very clear, is that popular media has more of an effect on people than the fine arts media. To think that this isn't true is foolish. Love the field I'm in. Maybe because I came into it after doing all the things that most comic book artists have ambitions to do but never get to do. I've had a syndicated strip and I've been an illustrator. And then I came into comic books.
I'm what you could call a kind of a first appearance, origin and good art collector. Meaning I don't collect entire runs of comics. I tend to break off where an artist finishes and perhaps restart when another artist starts, or the same artist starts.
The horror comics were quite startlingly horrible, and enough to frighten me as a kid anyway, into just not reading them after, you know, my initial, their initial impact. I just got so scared of them, I just put them, you know, just left them alone.
Well, we own, that's Mike, myself and another partner called Mike Luckman, who is now in the States. We own two enterprises, one called Titan Distributors and the other one called Forbidden Planet. Titan Distributors is a wholesale company. Forbidden Planet is a bookshop.
I think the bulk of the people that come in here are my age, which is 27, or a bit younger. People that have grown up through the 60s, either the early or the late 60s, because you'll be aware there was a lot more notice given to Batman and Superman and Spider-Man and things in that time.
We mix with a lot of people who are into comics who are, you know, in their 20s and 30s. And those are the only people I know that I have comics in common with. But they're a very, very tiny percentage of the people who shift the copies, you see.
Why are you here today?
To Neil Adams, great fan of his.
Do you like what he does?
Oh, I like his art tremendously, yeah, I think he's a great artist. Well, his style, you saw some of the classics he's done, absolute classics, pieces of work he's produced, comics, it's quite amazing.
I came to see Neil Adams, I mean, naturally. But,
you like him a lot?
Well, he's a pro.
This is mine. Hi! How are you? I'm going to sign one of these things for you, okay? And then you can put it in there. It's really nifty.
What is it?
Hi!
Hi.
What's your name?
Eldad. 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 Yes.
Eldad?
Yeah, no, there's several.
Am I what? Still in dispute with Marvel? Yeah. It's been a year now. One of the important things that people don't understand about the comic book business is that no matter how good you are, you get paid the same amount of money as everybody else. That's not so bad because they sell the same amount of comic books. But then they take a better guy's work or even just another guy's work and they reprint it somewhere else. They sell it to this country or that country. And Jesus, it just doesn't seem fair. You know, 1%, I mean, just say 1% guys, you know, you're doing a good job, we're selling them like hotcakes, we'll give you a few bucks. They don't do that. So you got to stand up and fight for it. I mean, it's the only way to get it. Well, it's going to be a guild, and we got 50 members so far. This is for you too. We're going to be peaceful. Not going to get anybody upset. We're just going to go in and say, hey, how about a fair break?
How do you feel about the fact that you're just putting your signature on them and they're rocketing in value just because they're signed by you. You know, I think that's
It's
wrong.
sort of like being ripped off.
In England, comics, as I understand it, came over in the 40s because of the American servicemen, and I think that must have carried on until most of the American servicemen went back. But the actual main influx of comics came over in late '59.
We used to visit American Air Force bases because they have little PXs, they have little newsagents there and they air freight all the comics over, but just for the servicemen. And we used to talk our way into these PXs and get the comics early that way.
What makes a comic collectible is usually the fact that it's in front of the bloke, because this is always a big decision area. Is it good enough for you? I mean, if it's mint, then usually the only thing you're worried about is, can I afford it or am I going to afford it? But when the comic is in a lesser grade, it's purely subjective. If a guy if you say grade it as just about acceptable, but the price is high, there's a kind of But if it's mint and the price is high, I don't think there's that much compulsion. You normally have it.
Most kids seem to want to get the set of Marvel comics. Now that's 19 years old now. I find it unbelievable myself that it's 19 years, 18 years then, because I've been buying them that long. I bought these things off the newsstand as they came out, like 18 years ago. And with the demand for them now, the prices of those old comics is astronomical. You can pay 150 to 200 pounds for the first Spider-Man and Fantastic Four in England, and 2 or 3 times that price in America.
There are people who collect in a title, and if there's a gap in that title, then some people will want it. Other people will just be content to get the next one along, but then I would think they're not really the true collector. They are just the, not to say that there's anything wrong with them, but they are just the kids who just go and buy it, and then if they don't see it, they'll wait till they get the next copy.
We always reckon on 100%, same as any antique, any second-hand business tends to run on doubling up of your money. Like we would give, well, in the case of this old collection that we got in, we reckoned it was worth £3,000. We went through the list that the guy gave us in detail and worked out our selling price at about £3,000. Now, the guy that was selling them wanted the best price he could possibly get, and he'd circularised every dealer that he knew. And I was determined to get that collection for this place, sort of a public relations job. I didn't really care what it cost us, if we could afford it, because I wanted to see that stock up on these walls. And we eventually paid £1,800 for it, which is more than we should have done the way we normally work. As it happened, there was nothing left of that collection after 3 weeks.
Well, it's a double-edged sword, isn't it? I mean, because at the same time your collection is appreciating in value, but I'm a realist, I realise that I'll never sell it, so it's only a liability as far as I'm concerned.
About 8 years ago, some American collectors, well, one American collector, Bob Overstreet, decided that there was a place in comic fandom for a price guide. This guy had been a collector for many years beforehand, and he knew all the dealers. He used to get everybody's price lists. He knew lots of fans. He knew how different comics were shifting, increasing in value. And what he basically did was a first listing of every American comic that had ever come out from the first one, which is about 1933, up to date, and decided he looked at each individual comic and decided what price those had gone for on average in the previous year, and then separated it out into a mint condition comic, a fine condition comic, which is like middle grade, and a good condition comic, which is theoretically the worst condition a collector will accept.
I think most collectors aim for mint, but the yardstick is the price, you know. It's a very complex subject, you know. In fact, some collectors will just have it in any condition because their sphere of collecting is so wide that they can't be bothered to worry about it. They'll just have it and then they can forget about it.
So this price guide was a huge success. He had no idea how successful it was going to be. And now, the 9th year of updating it. It really is extremely accurate. It's a professional job, and every dealer in the whole world bases their prices on this flaming price guide. And it has to put prices up a little bit. Any price guide is inflationary.
I'd like to have a word with Bob Overstreet, the guy who compiles it. They seem to be kind of running little things, like this year it mentions infinity covers. It says a particular market for infinity covers, and we'll list them when we know about them. So immediately they're putting an idea into somebody's mind that infinity covers are collected. Now, whether this is a genuine response to the market, and there is a definite market for infinity covers, and really it's something that we don't know about it because we're in England, or whether they are trying to create a market and create a price increase, I don't know.
There is a difference between the American collecting market and the British collecting market. For one thing, what the comics I mentioned before, the non-distributed comics in England, are more valuable in England than they are in America. You find that over the last 15 years of comics coming into England through the big distributors, every so often, 1 month gets missed. Like Fantastic Four number 80, featuring a giant living totem pole. Never turned up in England in any quantities at all. And that goes for 3 times as much as number 79 or number 81.
There are still collectors, optimistically, who are what you could call completists, their ambition is to own every comic.
Art. No matter what you may think, it's as disciplined a profession as the law or medicine. I got good because I worked my ass off. And there are other guys that work their ass off and they don't get good. It's a tough business. And there's always another guy out there. There's 1,000 guys out there that want to do what you want to do. And they're going to burn you. And they're going to burn you. I'm telling you, they're going to burn you. You got to care more than they care. You got to be dedicated more than they're dedicated, and you got to burn yourself out. And that's what it's about.
Neil Adams served a really kind of good apprenticeship in comics. I mean, he worked in for a long time. But a lot of modern artists, they work in it for a relatively short time, and then they get good offers from studios, or they decide to set their own studios up. So they don't work in comics for so long. Like Frank Branagh is an excellent artist, but he didn't stay in comics for a long time. He's now doing covers again, but that's not the same thing as kind of 15, 20 pages of art.
In 1952, a comic book artist would get $50 a page for a comic book page. Today, that same artist, or another artist, would get $75 a page. In that same time, a person working for the city of New York would have been getting $50 a week in 1952 and would now be getting between $250 and $300 a week. There's a great discrepancy in there. Comic book artists' rates have not gone up with the cost of living.
Some of the older guys who sort of really slugged their way up, and they're now still there, but they've, I suppose in a sense you might say that they're the real professionals, the guys who have done it for a living and can maintain a number of pages per week or a number of pages per day.
Very often it just constantly boils down to economics, and you don't want it to be this way. For the younger artist, he'll put his heart and soul into anything. As an artist gets older, he still has that heart and soul, but he has to be paid money. I mean, it constantly comes back to economics. If he isn't paid enough, he'll take that creative ability and do something else with it.
Well, first of all, it's kind of hard to get in, but then when they do get the work, the page rates are fairly low. They find that they're working, it takes them an awful long time to produce one page, and that's consequently they're not earning an awful lot of money.
I get round to an agent, and they took one look at it and said, "Not really our cup of tea, son." And I've been building up to this moment when I was going to launch into the professional world, and they just sent me away. Fortunately, a month later they phoned back and said, "Well, we have something coming up you could do, 68 quid a week," and that was more money than I'd ever heard of.
Creative people lock themselves in a closet and create, and if somebody gives them $1 for it, they appreciate it. A penny for it, and they appreciate it.
I'm sort of like a film director, you could almost say. I position the characters, and I just get them standing in the right place, and I make sure they're sort of facing the camera and so on. And I just have them with their mouths open if they're saying something. And hopefully, if the letterer isn't drunk that day, he'll get the word balloon coming from the right man's mouth.
Nothing happened to the printing, something happened to the inking.
I did the second story, and they were both inked by George Russos. Later on, they were inked by human beings.
Yeah, very good. That page, take that page as an example. From starting off with a basic piece of whatever it is, card or paper, I'm going to take you to ink that one in.
Ink it?
Draw it, sorry, from scratch to get
Pencil.
to that stage. Pencil it, you just do the pencil.
Half a day.
That is how many hours working?
Anywhere between 4 and 6.
They've decided to introduce a couple of new characters, and they're a little bit more clean cut and a little bit more traditional hero figures than usual. And in this case, for instance, you see I have a little rundown which goes, the heroes of Mars Force are 2 young Firehawk fighter pilots. One is from Earth, the other from Mars. This difference is a key point of the strip because they can be of constant help to each other. This particular writer, he often gives me sort of 3 or 4 sheets of foolscap, typed foolscap, just to give me an idea of what the main characters look like. Sometimes you get whole armies of mutants, all described in detail. The lead characters, just ridiculous. I draw eyes a lot from the mirror, or my eyes a lot from the mirror, and people always say they recognise my eyes, which isn't quite the desired effect. I don't know quite what there is about comics. I think it was mainly the American comics that I thought, I can make things like this, you know, and I sat down with my bits of typing paper and my blue biro and without a ruler, and I drew my little figures, and everybody did. We don't really draw for 8-year-olds and 10-year-olds. We draw for ourselves. Because sitting up here in our garret rooms, we don't meet any kids, and that's a real drawback, really, that you just don't get to understand the mind of the audience you're aiming at. So we draw our characters, and they can be violent, and they can have little sort of sexual innuendos thrown in and various things. And we get away with them quite well. The staff on 2000 AD, for instance, they're quite a young bunch, and they're doing it to entertain themselves. But occasionally they get a visitation from above, from the powers that be, saying, you're getting a bit naughty on here, too many bosoms, and sort of political problems creeping in. Very occasionally I sneak in a character who has his lips all chained up with chains and his teeth filed to points. And sometimes these things slip by, but I think the basic point is that if this story was going to be a film, it had to have a U certificate. You know, an A certificate, then it's not really quite right for the kids.
Comic code virtually cancels any form of modern plot attempt. The good guy must always win. Bad people, even if they don't win at the end of the comic, must never be seen to be glamorous, attractive, romantic. And so virtually within this Matchbox restraint, they've got to try and form some plot.
They do conform to some sort of comics code still, you know, that they don't glorify things like syndicated crime.
That came about through EC. Entertaining comics, if you believe what they say. It came about simply because there was this, as I say, tailing off of the 40s superheroes, and people were frantically looking around for something to revive their flagging titles. And so Albert Feldstein, who was the editor, or managing editor, decided to try a few kind of gunfighter, crime sort of titles, which I think were moderately successful. And then they came about this brilliant idea of launching these 3 horror titles, which were of Horror, Crypt of Terror and The Haunt of Fear, and also 2 science fiction titles, Weird Science and Weird Fantasy. And these 5 titles naturally launched other titles when they became successful, and it started a whole movement away from superheroes. This, in fact, obviously drew in other companies who wanted to get in on this very lucrative market, because EC were a very stable company, producing very good comics and selling very well. And in an attempt to outdo them, they became more garish, thirsty. Other comic companies would produce much more outlandish scripts, much more bloodthirsty, and usually not so well drawn. And so the whole thing levelled off. A book by Frederick Werton called Seduction of the Innocent, which virtually blamed these comics. In fact, it's a very American trait, like McCarthyism, to pick on a section of the community and blame them for all the ills that bemoans the country, or they think bemoans the country at that time. And they attempted to blame comics, particularly horror comics, for juvenile delinquency and the corruption of youth and the general kind of alienation of youth to their parents. And the comic code was formed internally as an internal censorship, which is always the worst, I think, the worst sort of censorship you can ever have. In fact, I think if they'd allowed comics to grow, there would have been an adult market. And in fact, the idea of a comic being fun, silly, childish would have gone, and it would have become, like in Italy and France, a major kind of literary force for grown-ups as well as for children.
Come 1961, Marvel Comics, who were a very small, struggling little company just putting out 4 fantasy comics in those days, decided to try a superhero comic, and they did it with a difference. They did it with characters who fought amongst themselves, who squabbled, who went to college, had love affairs, junk like that. People superheroes who behaved like real people.
I mean, I think Marvel Comics, for all its hot-ass factory atmosphere, has brought a real dynamism in lots of their comics through a handful of artists who've been allowed to break through the conventions, the barriers. People like Steranko and Neil Adams, who brought a new dynamism into the comic strip page, away from the fixed format of, square pictures. They've broken that up. They've moved frames along. They've used cinematic devices.
When I first started on 2000 and a few comics, Wizard for DC Thompson and a few things, I thought, I've been out of the British scene a bit, maybe I ought to jump in with both feet and have frames, feet sticking out everywhere and wheels coming out of the frame into the next frame and the whole thing chaos. I think I overdid a little. I don't personally feel very comfortable sort of freaking out with the frame layout. To be quite honest, I'm not really that interested in the page layout as a whole. I just think of the frame as like a window, and it's arbitrary what shape the window is, providing you can see through it into the world that's going on inside. And I think the more you draw the reader's attention to the fact that this is a piece of graphics on a sheet of paper, because of all the very clever jiggery-pokery in the design of the thing, then I personally think it distracts from the story content.
At the beginning, in the Marvel Comic Factory, you've got a whole range, you've got the production side of a comic departmentalized. One man would do the pencil roughs, another man would come along and ink it all in, and so immediately you've got two styles, sometimes conflicting. Then you've got somebody else would put on the colour, and a fourth person would do the lettering. And people like Steranko actually rebelled against that system and demanded that they did the pencil roughs and the inking in, and sometimes the colour as well.
I think the better artist can use the shape of the frame to the best advantage, so that it doesn't look as if he's just having fun at our expense. But occasionally you'll get a scene of someone jumping off a cliff or just falling to his doom from an aeroplane, and you might see the whole page divided into diagonal strips, and you would see the top one would be a triangle, and you'd see the plane and the little figure coming out, and gradually as you got to the middle of the frame you'd get closer to this figure and you'd see his face and his eyes open and his mouth open, and then as the page would continue, he would just splat in the last little corner somewhere, and that would work very well. I've gone personally back to verticals and horizontals. I prefer to put all the concentration of what the thing's going to look like in the frame, rather than where the frame's going to go, more what's going to go in the frame. And a page can look very static if all of the figures are seen from eye level. You know, they don't move, they're just standing around. And you can often forget, you know, often I've drawn a page and I look at it and I think, good grief, doesn't move an inch. Why didn't I just have that scene looking down and have that scene looking up? Scenes looking up are a lot easier. If you look up at a person, they look very impressive. But if you look down on people, you have to draw the thing they're standing on, you have to draw the chair they're standing in front of, you have to draw 100 people standing behind them. And you just have to balance what would look very exciting and what would create the best effect with what you really have time for. I'm slower than average. In fact, I'm quite a slow artist. In fact, at the moment, they've put me onto a sort of non-schedule basis. The real professional will always, the deadline will be paramount. It's the most important thing, just to get it in on time. And what it looks like is secondary. Neil Adams is getting more into the politics of being a creative artist and being able to control your own work and own your own work and own the serial rights to your own work.
He's also helped an awful lot in the case of Siegel and Schuster, who are the creators of Superman.
These two guys created this character at 17 years old, sold it at 21, and foolishly signed a piece of paper that said that all their rights would be taken away forever. And they were taken away forever, and there's a long story associated with that we don't really have time for, but the fact is that comic book artists are still signing contracts like that.
Yeah, he took them on TV, and he campaigned against DC, and has now got them both a $10,000 pension, which is some compensation, but in a way they can never really be compensated.
The comic book business started ashamed of itself. Comic book companies generally all around the world are run by accountants who have difficulty filling up press time with material. So their solution is to print comic books.
I think if you understand comics, what it is that they have to keep reviving interest. A title starts to flag, so they put a good artist in it. They know that certain artists will command a following. So if a title is dropping, they may well swap the artist onto that title for 4 or 5 issues to boost the sales, and then they'll move him on so that the fans will follow him, but also they hope will carry on buying that title as well. I mean, this is the way comics work, you know.
It's a business. Maybe they won't sell that much, maybe they'll do all right. The important part of that business is that you keep your presses running. They don't really care about the comic books.
But it's just their policy, isn't it? I think it's their general Philistine attitude towards their public. I think, you know, they're not particularly interested.
In our field, we want to do what we do, and we will give up a great deal in order to do it. But there's a point at which a person has to support himself and his family, and he still wishes to create. And when people do that, they have to get together and insist on it, or give up the ghost and go elsewhere. I, for one, am not going to give up the ghost and go elsewhere. I will stay in the comic book field, I will create in the comic book field, and I will be paid properly. And if it takes my getting everybody else in the business together to insist on being paid properly, that's what I'm going to do.
I started collecting British comics when I was a kid, how long ago that is, 15 years ago. But I only got interested in American comics about 4 years ago.
I started reading them when I was about, 7, American comics. My dad introduced me to them. I collect everything I can afford, just about.
When I get Showcase 4, I'm not going to sit back and say, right, that's the end of my collecting. Because naturally there's other things you want. You know, there's always something, because as soon as you go back to a point, you just immediately transfer your affections to another area of collecting.
It does seem a pity that what was essentially ephemera is now, collectors' items.
Well, there's a clue to what's happening in comics, in that there are people who are not associated with any major artistic drive, who are normal people who might be sensitive to a particular type of style or drawing ability or whatever it is, will go out of their way to pay £200 for a piece of original art, just of a comic book page, that the artist might have been paid half that much or less than half that much to produce for a publisher. Now, he's not insane. He and his fellows are not insane. There's something has happened to them. They have been affected, and affected deeply, so that they would reach into their own pocket and take money out and spend it. This is a clue. The growth of comic books will happen by scratching and clawing and trying to attain excellence through overwhelming odds. I don't see any art form ever succeeding because it had an easy path. Now, the potential of this form is the potential of the artist and writer, or the artist/writer involved. In other words, it's not that a comic book is bad. It's that a comic book may not be done by quality people. If a comic book, in other words, if you could just think of it as, not as a comic book, but as a form in which an artist and a writer collaborate and create a story, then the quality of the artist and the quality of the writer working together create the quality of the story. And if you take the greatest artist and the greatest writer and put them together on a story, then you have equally as good a piece of art as you could ever imagine in any field. I feel very strongly that I'm proud to say that I'm a comic book artist. I don't go around screaming at people and holding them by the lapels and saying I'm a comic book artist, but anybody asks me what I do, I say I draw comic books. Those of us who really feel good about it are trying to convince our fellows that if they are comic book artists, they better say that they're comic book artists, because there's no other name for a comic book than a comic book.